There is absolutely no doubt that Billy Graham was a deceiver as early as 1950. It was also during the 1950s that Billy rejected the King James Bible and began using and endorsing the Alexandrian text and the new Bibles coming from it. In 1954, the apostate World Council of Churches released their own corrupt Alexandrian translation called the Revised Standard Version. Even most Alexandrians rejected this perversion of Scripture. A man named R. Laird Harris wrote, quote, "It is a curious study to check the Revised Standard Version of the Bible, a monument of higher critical scholarship, and note how every important Old Testament passage purporting to predict directly the coming of Christ has been altered so as to remove this possibility. It is almost impossible to escape the conclusion that the admittedly higher critical bias of the translators has operated in all of these places. The translations given are by no means necessary and from the Hebrew, and in some cases are in clear violation of the Hebrew." End quote. He wrote that in his book, Inspiration and Canonicity of the Bible. But Billy endorsed that Bible, so-called. He quoted from it, and he distributed it to the world of Christendom. And Billy would dispense Alexandrian corruption to churches all over the world for the next half-century, and his ministry continues to do so to this very day. The 60s were tumultuous for the American nation and for the world. Corruption reigned in government and in business, as well as the ministry of Billy Graham. Billy had secretly built a lasting relationship with the Pope. Billy had fully embraced the liberal apostates. And what most people don't know is that Billy had also begun to deny Scripture and openly embrace devil-possessed scholars who attacked God's Word, blasphemed Jesus Christ, and mocked the cross. Hayes Minnick, a minister with the Orlando Bible Church, quotes Graham in February 1962 regarding the Genesis account. Quote, "In this paradise that God had built, called the Garden of Eden, you can take it symbolically, you can take it literally. It makes no difference as far as the truth and meaning is concerned." End quote. Here is Billy speaking at Harvard Law Forum in 1962, where he sends a message loud and clear that he isn't going to stand against liberals or communism.
I would like to add this comment that I believe that a Christian is a person that is to live Christ under any form of government, whether it be Rome, or whether it be communism, or whether it be Nazism, that we are to live Christ in the midst of that situation insofar as we possibly can. And I would like to say, lest it be misunderstood, because one or two people brought it up earlier, I am not a member of, nor am I identified with, any left-wing organization or right-wing organization. And I'm simply, in my work, trying to be a Christian and stay in the center of proclaiming the gospel, which I believe is an answer to the individual in any society under any form of government.
A true man of God will stand against sin. And a Christian doesn't just live Christ, as Billy puts it. When he lives in a constitutional republic, he has a duty to stand for what is right and to vote and to stand against the left wing whose philosophy is anti-Christian and whose lack of biblical morality makes them the enemies of the cross. I am not advocating party affiliation. I am advocating biblical truth. And herein lies the issue. Either Billy Graham is what Stalin called a useful idiot, or Billy Graham is a devil. When Billy visited the Soviet Union in 1982, he ignored the millions of slaughtered Christians and the unknown tens of thousands of imprisoned believers who were being worked to death in slave labor camps. Billy stood in Moscow and told the world, "There's nothing to see here." Billy's willingness to be used as Soviet propaganda shocked millions inside and outside of Russia. The San Diego Union, May 14, 1982, put it well, quote, Dr. Graham has permitted his good name and his ministry to be exploited for the benefit of Soviet propaganda. It was bad enough that Dr. Graham lent his name and presence to the Soviet-sponsored worldwide conference of religious workers for saving the sacred gift of life from nuclear catastrophe. This affair was never destined to be anything more than a thoroughly manipulated component of the Soviet Union's patently duplicitous peace offensive. Its purpose is to weaken Western defenses. End quote. This betrayal of the brethren is seen vividly in the movie called The Printing, available on DVD. Billy would do the same thing in China, working with the government-controlled Three-Self Church and telling the world that he saw no real evidence of human rights abuses. There is no such thing as a left-wing Christian. There is no such thing as a born-again Christian filled with the Spirit of Jesus Christ who supports left-wing causes, which include abortion, sodomy, socialistic government programs, etc. Whether he is unregenerate or simply deceived, Billy was wrong. And Billy didn't just placate the left. He embraced it, especially the left-wing liberal church. March 1962, John R. Rice of the Sword of the Lord wrote, quote, Dr. Graham is the front man, the chief spokesman for a growing group of people who believe in yoking up with unbelievers, contrary to the Scriptures. They believe that a man may be saved without believing that the Bible is true or without believing in the virgin birth or the deity of Christ. They call people Christians who are really infidels by dictionary definition, that is, not believing the fundamentals of the historic Christian faith. Dr. Graham is the chief spokesman for those who believe in the inclusive policy of coexistence of unbelievers and believers, saved and lost, Bible believers and infidels in the same organization. End quote. Notice Rice used the same word that Graham himself used to describe himself, inclusive. In response to Graham's new relationship with the Pope, Roman Catholics would lavish Billy with gifts and honors throughout the 60s. For example, in 1963, Dr. Graham spoke at Belmont Abbey College, which is a North Carolina Catholic school. Then, a few years later, on November 21, 1967, he returned to Belmont Abbey to receive an honorary degree from this Roman Catholic Jesuit school. Billy was a good friend to Rome. In the 70s, the praise and adulation from Rome would continue. Meanwhile, Graham became a voice for Catholicism, paving the way for the Pope. On many occasions, papal visits would follow Graham's crusades, and the Pope would find that Billy had set the stage quite nicely. He received the 1972 Franciscan International Award for True Ecumenism. That's a code word for someone who serves Rome. And he received it from Roman Catholics who appreciated what Graham was doing to strengthen Rome around the world. By 1973, true men of God like Bob Jones Sr. were convinced that Billy was being used of Satan. On page 275 of his autobiography, Graham himself admits that while in Seoul, Korea that year, quote, my interpreter, Billy Kim, had just graduated from Bob Jones and had received a letter from Dr. Bob warning that if he interpreted for me, his support from America would be cut off, end quote. And Billy goes on to say that Kim did interpret for him. Dr. Bob didn't want to pay someone to interpret for a false prophet, and Bob Jones Sr. had it right. In 1977, Graham preached a crusade on the grounds at Notre Dame University, sweeping thousands into Rome's clutches. In 1978, Billy had reached the point that he became for the Roman Catholic Church what Stalin called a useful idiot.